Sonal, what's your view? Because as Prabir said, you can't really go and fire thousands and thousands of people. But this is a real issue. And do you think a large part of it can be attributed to work from home, to the gig economy? Because in that context, yes, giant companies like a TCS or a Wipro are really stepping up the ante on coming back to office.
I think it's 50 shades of grey. There's no one answer, and you can't broad brush it either which way, though I don't disagree with any of what's just been said. But there is ethical moonlighting, and I think people know when they're crossing the line. If you can't share with your employer, your primary employer, that you are actually doing another gig, I think it speaks volumes about whether you know if what you're doing is right or wrong. So that's a fairly simple moral compass to apply. The way forward may be to say that there are two kinds of employees, and perhaps organizations have to respond to that differently. There is the long-term employee who's building a career within an organization, who wants to be trained, who wants to become a manager, who wants to have opportunities within a certain framework. There is a young emerging gig workforce which is not looking at employment that way. And perhaps the rules for them need to be different. The transparency or the social contract with them needs to be completely different from what it is with traditional companies.
Okay. How much of this is about pay, Dr. Rajan? Because there was also all this furor about how some of these young freshers at IT companies are not being paid enough. There have been a lot of various reports and comebacks from the companies, and we can get into that. But how much of this is about wanting to earn more, or is this really about, as we heard from the minister and as Sonal's echoing, about just having a whole host of new opportunities? The mic.
I was saying that the controversial spotlight is now on those who moonlight. 20 years back, Charles Handy had written a book called The Age of Unreason, where he talked about future workforce belonging to three distinct categories. He talked about the Shamrock organization and three distinct leaves that will make up the workforce. And I think that's the genesis in terms of what he had pointed out, that there are a core group of people who actually run the enterprise, who are part of the enterprise, are more the permanent employees. Then you have a contingent workforce, which is more temporary in nature, but they're working at the enterprise. And the third is self-employed professionals who are actually there to do gig for you. And the problem here is the fact that the permanent employees, which is seen as the primary employment, the distances between the three are getting blurred. So today you have somebody who's actually part of an enterprise, and that's his primary job, and he's going somewhere else. But then there are two, three different dimensions, and you have to look at it from a statutory or a legal dimension at one end. You also have to look at the ethics and the morality behind it. And the third aspect is essentially to do with the relationship, the nature of relationship that you have. So on the statutory part, whether it's Factories Act or whether it is shops and establishment, clearly it does not recognize a possibility or support dual employment per se. But that's so much for the statute, the meaning is not exactly clear. On the ethical part of it, sometimes when we take polar positions, and here there is a conflict of interest in terms of what the employer wants from expectations point of view and what the employee feels as far as entitlement. And I come back to a specific question that you raised in terms of compensation. The question really is that why is it happening the way it is happening? And when you're talking of ethics, at one end, if I frown upon the fact that you are my employee and therefore you have no business to do something else somewhere else, there are reasons why they're saying it. But the moot question that I have is, if you refer to it as unethical behavior and you've sacked X number of people, what it also implies is that you have not taken the route to warn. And if you want to take a moral high ground, then if you're talking of ethics, should you be sacking without giving them a chance to begin with? Should you keep the income disparity in terms of compensation disparities at the levels at which they are, where if you are worried about your bottom line, an individual is worried about his safety net. So, it's a complicated matter, and today things are changing, and I'll leave it there, Abhay, we'll pick it up later.
Sure. So, yeah, go ahead, Sonal.
Sorry, I was going to weigh in about the reasons as to, is this working? No.
Go ahead.
the reasons as to why it's come into focus as much as it has today, work from home, obviously, but the fact is that there is a labor market boom. It's a seller's market at the moment. This may or may not last forever, and the tide will turn when that changes. The other thing which people don't look at is that the consequences for doing something which is on the edge or in the gray zone here, there are no consequences because you're not going to take these people to court. You're not going to sue, as you said, 50,000 employees. They lose their jobs, fine. But the whole point is that they're doing another job anyway. Yeah. So this has perhaps been a conducive environment to experiment more with this kind of thing without too much of a